Warm summer wind drifted across the wide-open fields as Samantha adjusted her sunglasses and looked around at the unfamiliar countryside. The dusty road stretched endlessly in both directions, a far cry from the bustling avenues of New York she was used to. She had only planned to be here for a weekend getaway, an escape from her busy city life. But now she found herself in a scene she never would have imagined. A large, rusty tractor stood by the roadside, its hood open and smoke curling out, while a rugged man with grease on his hands worked tirelessly to fix it. Samantha hesitated at first, unsure if she should involve herself. But something about the man's determined expression drew her closer. The farmer glanced up when he noticed her standing nearby. Samantha's designer boots were clearly out of place in the dusty gravel, and her white blouse glowed against the dull background of the farmland. He smirked slightly, wiping his forehead with a greasy rag. "Don't tell me you know anything about tractors," he teased, his tone carrying both skepticism and humor. Samantha straightened her shoulders, slightly annoyed at his assumption. "Actually, I might," she replied confidently, though her heart pounded in her chest. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused but not convinced. To him, she looked like someone more at home in a high-rise apartment than beside a broken-down piece of farm equipment. Memories of her grandfather suddenly flashed in Samantha's mind. When she was younger, she had often visited his garage, on the edge of the city. Unlike her parents, who preferred luxury and ease, her grandfather loved tinkering with engines and teaching her how machines worked. He would always say, "Samantha, machines don't care who you are or where you're from. Respect them, and they'll work for you." The scent of oil and the clanking of metal had become familiar to her then, even if she hadn't touched a tool in years. Looking at the farmer struggling now, she realized this might be the moment to put her long-buried lessons to use. Without waiting for permission, Samantha stepped closer and peered under the tractor's hood. "Looks like your fuel line might be loose," she murmured, brushing her hair away from her face. The farmer gave her a curious look, his skepticism softening just slightly. "Fuel line, huh?" he asked, watching as she carefully pointed out a connection that seemed off. Her manicured fingers were soon smudged with grease as she twisted a bolt, adjusting it the way she remembered her grandfather had taught her. The farmer folded his arms and leaned back, observing with both surprise and admiration as this city girl, who clearly didn't belong here, bent over the machine with confidence. When Samantha tightened the last bolt, she stepped back and wiped her hands on her jeans without hesitation. "Try it now," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heartbeat. The farmer climbed onto the tractor, turned the key, and after a few sputters, the machine roared to life. The sound echoed across the empty fields like a small victory, startling a flock of birds from a nearby fence. Samantha couldn't help but smile with pride, while the farmer looked at her in pure disbelief. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, shaking his head with a grin. "City girl's got some tricks up her sleeve." His eyes softened, no longer mocking but filled with respect. For the first time, Samantha felt she had earned a place in this unfamiliar world, even if just for a moment. The rumble of the tractor filled the quiet countryside, and Samantha stepped back, brushing dirt from her hands. The farmer's wide grin didn't fade as he shut off the machine and climbed down. His boots crunched against the gravel as he walked toward her, shaking his head in disbelief. "Not every day I see someone from the city get their hands dirty," he said, his voice warm but teasing. Samantha chuckled softly, brushing her hair from her face, a streak of grease on her cheek she hadn't noticed. "Well, not every city girl is completely helpless," she answered, her tone playful but honest. For a moment, they simply stood there, surrounded by the open fields and the distant calls of birds. Two strangers from completely different worlds, sharing an unexpected connection over a broken machine. The farmer finally extended his hand, introducing himself as Daniel. His grip was firm, his palms rough with years of labor. Samantha found herself oddly comforted by his grounded presence. "So what brings you out here, Samantha?" he asked, curiosity glimmering in his eyes. She hesitated, realizing her answer might sound silly. "Honestly, I just needed a break from the noise," she admitted. "The city never stops moving. I thought maybe the countryside would be quieter." Daniel nodded knowingly. "You came to the right place. Around here, the loudest thing is usually an old tractor," he said with a laugh. Samantha smiled, realizing she was already breathing easier than she had in months. Daniel motioned toward the fields that stretched endlessly behind the tractor. "All of this land it's mine," he said casually, as though he were mentioning something ordinary. Samantha blinked in surprise, glancing at the acres of golden wheat swaying in the breeze. "All of it? You own this?" she asked incredulously. He shrugged modestly. "Been in the family for generations. I just keep it running." For a city girl like Samantha, who was used to measuring success by skyscrapers and bank balances, the sheer size of his farm was staggering. She had thought of him as just a small-town farmer, but now she realized he carried a legacy bigger than she had imagined. As they talked, Samantha couldn't help but notice how different Daniel's world was. His hands bore scars from years of work, His clothes smelled faintly of soil and oil, and his entire being seemed tied to the rhythm of the land. She compared it to her own life: luxury apartments, corporate meetings, crowded streets, and wondered if maybe she had been missing something vital. Daniel caught her thoughtful expression and smirked. "What's on your mind, city girl?" he asked. Samantha shook her head lightly, laughing. "Just realizing you live a life I've only ever read about." He raised an eyebrow. "And is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She paused before replying softly, "I think it might be a good thing." Daniel's smile widened, and he offered to show her around the farm. They walked together past rows of crops glowing in the evening sun. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of earth and wildflowers. Samantha marveled at the peace of it all. "It feels like time slows down here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "That's because out here, time doesn't control you. The land does. You work when it needs you, rest when it lets you. There's no traffic, no skyscrapers, just you and the earth." His words sank into Samantha like poetry. She found herself longing to understand this rhythm, to step into a life where the days weren't measured by appointments and deadlines, but by the rising and setting of the sun. When they reached a barn at the edge of the property, Daniel opened the door to reveal more machinery inside, some old and rusted, others still in use. Samantha ran her fingers lightly over a faded red tractor, its paint chipped but its body sturdy. "This one belonged to my grandfather," Daniel explained. "He taught me everything I know about fixing machines. Guess we both had grandfathers who left us something valuable." Samantha's chest tightened with emotion at the unexpected connection. "Mine taught me to never be afraid of hard work," she said softly. Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "Seems like he did a good job. You proved that today." The sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. Samantha leaned against the barn door, feeling strangely at home despite the dirt under her nails and the unfamiliar silence. Daniel leaned beside her, arms folded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Funny," he said quietly. "When I saw you walking up in those fancy boots, I thought you'd last 5 minutes out here, but you surprised me." Samantha laughed, a light, genuine sound. "Honestly, I surprised myself too." For a moment, their eyes met, and Samantha felt a spark she hadn't expected, a warmth that went deeper than the evening sun, a curiosity that made her wonder what else she might discover in this place. When the first stars began to appear, Daniel offered to drive her back into town on his pickup truck. Samantha hesitated, looking out at the wide fields one last time before nodding. As they drove along the dirt road, she rolled down the window, letting the cool night air rush past her face. The city lights suddenly felt very far away, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't miss them. Beside her, Daniel hummed quietly to an old country song on the radio, his presence steady and unshakable. Samantha smiled to herself, realizing this unplanned encounter with a broken tractor had already changed the way she saw the world and, maybe even herself. The night had grown cooler, and the stars above them shimmered like scattered diamonds. Across a velvet sky, Samantha leaned back against the metal frame of the tractor seat, feeling oddly comfortable, despite the hard surface beneath her. "You know," she began softly, "people always assume I'm fragile because of where I come from. They think money makes you weak." Her voice trembled slightly, carrying both pride and vulnerability. Daniel rested his elbows on his knees, listening in silence. There was something grounding about his presence, as though she could share anything. Without judgment, she exhaled, the words pouring out. "I always wanted to prove I was more than just a spoiled city girl. That's why fixing this tractor meant something. It wasn't just about the machine. It was about proving I could do something real, with my own hands." Daniel gave a small nod, his eyes steady on hers. He shifted slightly, the faint sound of crickets filling the silence before he finally spoke. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "People used to look at me and see nothing but a poor farm boy with no future. They'd say I'd never make it beyond these fields, never amount to much." Samantha turned her head, surprised by the honesty in his tone. Daniel's gaze remained on the horizon, his expression unreadable. "But I didn't listen. I worked harder than anyone. Every sunrise, every season, I put in the hours. Slowly, the land started to give back. You don't need people's approval when the earth itself teaches you your worth." His words struck her deeply. She had grown up measuring success by others' standards. Yet here was a man who carved his own without needing recognition. Samantha traced a finger absent-mindedly along the edge of the seat, absorbing his story. "That's humbling," she admitted quietly. "In the city, it feels like everyone is competing, climbing ladders, chasing after titles and status. But out here, it's like the work speaks for itself. You don't need to brag about it. It's written in the soil, in the crops, in the air." Daniel smiled faintly, impressed by her observation. "You see it," he said simply. She glanced at him, curious. "See what?" He met her eyes for a moment, then looked back at the endless fields stretching before them. The beauty most people overlook. The dignity in what's real. Samantha felt her chest tighten at the sincerity of his words, realizing that she had rarely slowed down long enough to notice such things before. Her eyes wandered across the vast property, the moonlight painting the land in silver. "It feels so big," she murmured, "like it could belong to someone important." She glanced at Daniel, half teasing. "You must work for someone with a lot of power to manage all of this." For the first time since she met him, Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that carried more than it revealed. His silence was curious, almost intentional, and it left Samantha wondering. Was he just a caretaker, a foreman, or was there more to this man than he let on? The mystery in his calm confidence tugged at her thoughts, leaving her both intrigued and unsettled. She had grown up around people who loved flaunting their wealth. Yet Daniel wore his life like a secret. Daniel leaned back, resting his hands on the wheel. "Sometimes it's better not to say everything at once," he remarked, his voice steady but gentle. "The land has its own story, and it doesn't rush to tell it." Samantha tilted her head, studying him. She was used to men who bragged about their jobs, their cars, their bank accounts, but Daniel seemed to find pride in silence. It was as though he had nothing to prove, in that, more than anything, fascinated her. "You're different," she said softly. "Most people want recognition, but you just live." He chuckled at her words, shaking his head. "Recognition doesn't keep the crops alive. Hard work does. The land doesn't care about names or titles. It only cares if you show up when it needs you." His calmness carried a weight that lingered. In the night air, the tractor seat creaked slightly as Samantha shifted, folding her arms. She found herself wanting to know more, not about the land, but about Daniel himself. "Don't you ever get tired? Doesn't it feel lonely?" she asked. Daniel's eyes softened, his gaze flicking toward the stars before returning to her. "Sometimes, but loneliness isn't the worst thing. Losing yourself, chasing things that don't matter, that's worse." His words caught her off guard, as though he had looked directly into her own life. She swallowed hard, remembering the endless events, the shallow conversations, the hollow victories back in New York. For a moment, she couldn't find the right words. Instead, she let the silence stretch, the sound of the night settling around them like a blanket. Daniel eventually rose from the tractor, stretching his arms, and offered his hand to help her down. She accepted, her smaller, softer hand fitting into his rough one. The touch lingered for a second longer than necessary, and Samantha felt a strange warmth rush through her. They walked together slowly back toward the farmhouse, the gravel crunching beneath their steps. Daniel didn't fill the quiet with unnecessary chatter, and Samantha found herself appreciating the simplicity of his company. "You know," she said finally, "I thought I came here to escape my life for a few days, but maybe I came to find something I didn't even know I needed." Daniel's lips curved into a small smile, though he kept his eyes forward. Sometimes the land doesn't just grow crops. Sometimes it grows clarity. When they reached the porch, Daniel leaned against one of the wooden beams, watching her with a thoughtful expression. Samantha tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "You really don't answer questions directly, do you?" she teased lightly. He grinned faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Some answers are better when they're discovered, not given." She tilted her head, curious but unwilling to push further. There was something in his restraint that drew her in more than a straightforward confession ever could. She realized then that the mystery was part of who he was, man grounded in soil and silence, carrying secrets not out of pride, but out of peace. And though she didn't fully understand him yet, she wanted to. The morning sun lit up the countryside, with a golden glow, painting the fields in soft hues that shimmered under the dew. Samantha's car rattled gently down the gravel road, her heart oddly excited as she made her way back toward the farm. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more, yet deep inside, she knew the pull was stronger than that. Something about Daniel, his quiet strength and unshaken humility, had unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. When she finally parked near the barn, she noticed several sleek cars lined up, far different from the dusty trucks she had seen yesterday. Men in dark suits stood around, holding papers and briefcases. Samantha frowned, confused, as her polished boots clicked softly against the dirt while she approached. The scene felt strangely out of place in the rustic setting. Her confusion deepened when she saw Daniel standing tall beside the barn. No longer in his faded jeans and work shirt, but in a clean, pressed button-down tucked neatly into dark trousers. He looked almost unrecognizable, though the familiar steadiness in his eyes remained. The suited men addressed him respectfully, calling him Mr. Harris as they handed over documents and waited for his signature. Samantha stopped in her tracks, the words echoing in her mind. Mr. Harris, owner of the land. Her eyes widened as realization sank, and Daniel wasn't just a simple farmer battling with tractors and tending crops. He was the owner of it all. The vast fields, the barns, the endless horizon, they were his. Thousands of acres belonged to the man she had assumed was just another hard-working farmhand. The air felt different now, heavy with a truth she hadn't expected. Samantha's jaw nearly dropped as she watched him sign the last paper with calm authority. The men in suits, nodding with satisfaction. The contrast was jarring yesterday. He had been elbow-deep in grease, quietly mending an old tractor. Today, he looked every bit the wealthy landowner, commanding respect without saying much at all. She stood frozen, a swirl of emotions coursing through her: shock, admiration, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. When Daniel finally looked up, his gaze found hers immediately. His lips curved into a knowing smile, the kind that teased her memory of their last conversation. Slowly, almost deliberately, he tipped his hat toward her, as though confirming everything she had just learned. Embarrassment rushed through her veins. She felt her cheeks flush hot as yesterday's words replayed in her mind how she had teased him about working for someone important. The irony stung. He hadn't just worked the land, he owned it. For a moment, she wondered if he had hidden it on purpose, letting her assume things so she would see him as ordinary. Maybe that was his lesson all along, that appearances deceive, and real worth doesn't always wear a name tag. Daniel dismissed the men politely, folding the signed papers and handing them back. They gave firm handshakes, tipped their heads, respectfully, and drove off in their cars, leaving the barnyard silent once again. Only then did he walk toward her, his boots crunching lightly against the gravel, his eyes calm and unreadable. "You're Mr. Harris," Samantha blurted, unable to hide her astonishment. Daniel chuckled softly, his expression amused by her reaction. "That's what they call me," he said, tipping his hat again playfully. "But to you, I'm just Daniel." She shook her head in disbelief, half laughing, half stunned. "All this time, you let me think you were just..." Her words trailed off. "Just a farmer," he finished for her, his tone warm, not mocking. "I wasn't lying, Samantha, I am a farmer. Owning land doesn't change that. The soil doesn't care what my bank account looks like. It still needs the same work, the same care." His words, simple, yet profound, struck her once again. It wasn't wealth that defined him, it was his grounded sense of self. Samantha laughed, the sound bubbling out as the tension melted into relief. "You really are something else," she admitted, shaking her head. "All the men I know in New York wouldn't last a day without bragging about their money, their businesses, their families' fortunes. But you act like it doesn't even matter." Daniel leaned casually against the fence, his eyes fixed on her with quiet amusement. "Because it doesn't," he replied. "Money can buy land, but it can't make it fruitful. Pride can build walls, but it can't feed people. Out here, you learn quickly that none of that means much if you can't roll up your sleeves and do the work." Samantha fell silent, her heart beating a little faster. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he lived it, every word proven by his actions. She realized then how much she had changed in just a few days. The city girl, who once cared about appearances, about proving herself to shallow eyes, was now standing in awe of a man who lived for something deeper. She thought about her grandfather, about the lessons he had tried to teach her through grease-stained hands and broken engines. Maybe he had been preparing her for this moment, reminding her that real worth wasn't found in boardrooms or social circles, it was in character, in humility, in love for the work you do. Looking at Daniel, she saw all of it embodied in one person. Her lips curved into a soft smile as she whispered, "You've taught me more in 2 days than I learned in 20 years of city life." Daniel's eyes softened, his steady voice answering, "And you reminded me that even the unexpected can belong here." The wind rustled gently through the tall grass, carrying with it the sweet scent of summer. For a long moment, neither spoke, content in the stillness of the morning. Then Daniel extended his hand toward her, palm open, an unspoken invitation. Samantha hesitated only briefly before slipping her hand into his, feeling the rough warmth of his touch. "Never judge by appearances," he murmured, his smile widening. "Life has a way of surprising us." Samantha laughed lightly, her heart swelling in a way she hadn't expected when she first drove into the countryside. She realized this wasn't just about learning to appreciate the land, it was about finding something real, something lasting, something that felt like home. And in that moment, as they stood together among the golden fields, she knew she had found more than a lesson. She had found the beginning of love.